California. So you guys are from different opposite sides of the country. So we have Sacramento, California,
Oh wow,
and Tennessee. So um,
nice.
Nashville area. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
just
yeah,
south.
you actually in Franklin or
So now that's where I worked and lived before, and now I'm in Spring Hill. So another like 20 minutes south, 25 minutes south. Um, so it was the best place to get a house. The only place, top 3 places that people have been moving to. So getting a house here has just been impossible. $100,000 over asking price, like sight unseen, people doing it just like over the phone.
awesome. And then Curtis is and you came from Southern California, San Diego. You're from San Diego, so you lived down there. You moved down there after
I was there for 17 years.
Oh
17
wow.
years. Wow.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Basically, my entire adulthood was spent in San Diego. So that's where I got stationed, stayed there, doing everything in and out of the military. And then I did University of San Diego.
And then Curtis is Sacramento, but he has family in LA area.
Well, yeah, I'm from LA. I've been in Sacramento about 10 years. I went to UC Riverside, so it's just freeway and inland.
Yeah.
So love San Diego too. And
Yeah.
a year in England in college, did some teaching in Asia, Korea, and Indonesia. So a little traveling, but mostly California.
Okay, cool.
And did you surf your way around all those places, Curtis?
I tried. Oh my goodness. I can't tell you how many surfing trips I've tried where I've gone somewhere and it's like flat. Like I went at the wrong time, or I did surf in Indonesia. I rented a surfboard in Bali, which is a little island, and I went to a spot and caught some waves. So I can say I've done it, but no, I'm not really a wave hunter.
Hank, did you ever do any surfing in San Diego?
A little bit. I actually regret not doing more. I mean, we were right there on the beach, like tons of friends that surfed, which is how I ended up out there. We just borrowed dudes boards and then we just literally walked out the back of the base and surfed in the morning for like, the PT, whatever, like designated time. So you could either work out or you could surf, you could do whatever you wanted. So I regret not surfing more.
Gotcha.
I was on Coronado Island on the south side of downtown.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Yeah. Right on the Silver Strand. So pretty awesome.
Well, dudes, let's get this officially started. So today we have CM Miller, an author. Are you're published by Canon Press, or you're working on that?
Not published by Canon Press yet.
Yeah.
I'm in talks with them for a book on drama, a book on playwriting called Stealing from Pirates. So yeah, I'm in talks to writing a book about drama. So you watch a show like The West Wing or House of Cards or like a Breaking Bad, and it's real. The characters talk, they use subtext, like it's real humans you're watching. That modern drama went back to Europe a couple hundred years ago, and the people that wrote plays that kind of gave us those techniques were secular humanists, and they kind of had an axe to grind against Christianity. And if you look at some of their plays, they were kind of on the intellectual scene, making Christianity unpopular, getting people to think that whatever's inside me, whatever, like my truth is right. Like the whole postmodern concept of like, you believe your truth, I believe mine, I could do no wrong. You see that reflected in their plays, in the guys who gave us modern drama. And so it's sad that a lot of theater schools, a lot of acting schools, a lot of drama came with some of that baked in. And you don't find many plays written by Christians. I mean, there's that one guy in New York who does Max McLean, who does C.S. Lewis plays, one-man shows. He's brilliant. He's amazing. Okay, what else? It's all Jewish Americans. It's all secular humanists, and they're the ones who've trained with people from Europe. Yeah, so I want to write I'm writing a book that says, here's the quick and dirty techniques. Here's how you make a play. Like, here's how you entertain an audience with a couple characters trying to get something from each other, which is interesting to watch. And you can do it without baking in non-Christian self-worship.
Right. Okay.
You don't have to buy their philosophy, but you can like write stuff with the techniques that are, I mean, they wrote good plays. Yeah, it doesn't have to go with, what they believed about anything I do is right if I truly believe it. Like there's a famous play where a woman, played by Henrik Ibsen, where at the end she walks out on her family because that's right for her. And she's kind of been wronged. Like how many people have abandoned their families based that opened up the door to like thinking, well, I can do what's right for me, and I must educate myself into what is right for me. Religion, faith, God, that's old hat. Like what's right for me is the new frontier. That's the idea that you see reflected there. And so Christians need to make plays and write plays and do drama without that poisonous idea, but with like the techniques that Shakespeare used, that Aristotle used.
I know in the past I've heard people talk about taking back the arts. I think our old pastor Hank, right, talked about taking back the arts. We had that, didn't we have that like dance group or whatever? And they were really trying to develop, kind of develop that philosophy and develop a style that was bringing back those arts into Christianity.
Yeah.
So
it's important. It's extremely needed because I think for a long time Christians took a back seat to that, and then that's the result, is that the only entertainment was secular and like you were saying, Curtis, like explicitly anti-Christian. I like the Daily Wire now is trying to do that with like making movies, because like who's making movies that aren't, some sort of like trying to get some political stint, instead of just like, hey, this is just a good, well-written script for everybody, and some positive messages and stuff. So it's awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. Taking back the arts. That's it. That's gosh, you're preaching to the choir. Super excited about that. I have a long drama background, done a bunch of plays, and it's like, where plays about good, meaty stuff by Christians, like digging at stuff, but not with this poisonous idea baked in, which the Daily Wire, they're just, people want to be entertained and they don't want the poison pill of, oh, well, if you're white, you got to repent of that.
The thing that inspired us to talk, so full disclosure, Curtis and I work together, and I love his writing and his thinking. And so I thought he'd be great to be on the podcast and just talk about some of the ideas of manhood and just how literature connects with manhood. It's the Warrior Poet Journal. It's not just the Warrior Journal, right? So, but I also believe that men, if we have clarity and we know right from wrong, we just talked about, oh, what's right for you and all this stuff. It can be really confusing. And for men, we need to be able to see black and white, because we need to be able to find truth, and we need to believe that truth can be found so that we know right from wrong. It can act, that the warriors can act on that truth, or else warriors become wicked, right? I mean,
right.
And destruction ensues. So we wanted to talk today. So the topic was a blog post you wrote. Kind of the inspiration for this conversation will be from this blog post you wrote about Watership Down. And you wrote that in 2020 during the pandemic, right? Yeah,
I did. And I'm honored that you have me on, by the way. That was as I was kind of getting to know Chris and working at Resound with him. So I'm just honored to be on here. And I've seen what you've been doing with Warrior Poet Journal, kind of, on the margins of working with you. So I'm always delighted when another guy reads my blog post on books, on fiction. Most guys don't read fiction. I mean, that's kind of the publisher's MO. The audience for fiction is kind of older women. So I'm honored. You read my blog post on Watership Down. And
I loved it. I started reading it to my son, and he was like, Daddy, we're going to read this, right? Don't spoil it for me. And so I just had to stop reading it for him because he forbade me. It's like, cool. Dude, don't spoil it for me. So anyway, you're inspiring young readers, Curtis.
That's the hope. Yeah, I was an English teacher for years, and if I can put winning the sales, I will. I guess a quick question, because I'm going to answer because you asked me to talk about when I wrote it in 2020. Can I do spoilers, by the way, or should I hold off, or should I just tell you what happens and what I wrote about?
I think it's fine. I just realized I'm getting used to my script here. So let me go ahead and intro the podcast, just go through all the stuff. I'm going to give the guest intro as well. So let's just do that real quick. So the podcast we're on right now, it's called Man Talk. It's the podcast of the Warrior Poet Journal. The point is to explore biblical manhood and encourage men to leadership and toughness for the glory of God. So today we're going to be talking with CM Miller about bravery through the story of Watership Down. I'm your host, Chris Stadler, and my co-host is Hank Henry, who I get to join me every time I can. Before we get to it, make sure you're subscribing to the video or subscribing to the channel if you want to see more videos, and then liking the video. If you have any sympathy for CM, for Hank, or for me, go ahead and give it a like. So today we have CM Miller, and I'm going to give some Curtis. I'm going to give some background. Curtis taught high school English for 8 years before he got his master's degree in creative writing. He's a playwright, he's an author, and he's a B2B content writer for Resound Creative Media, where we both have experience. And then he has a few of his own clients outside of that. He started Shelf of Crocodiles on Substack in 2021 with a salty review of Watership Down, which is a book about rabbits that blows safetyism, the safetyism of the 2020 pandemic response to smithereens. So thanks for joining us. It is an honor to have you, Curtis. I've known you for a while. I love your thinking. And I'm excited to hear how this conversation goes. You guys mind if I open with a little icebreaker?
Go for it.
Hey,
Let's do it.
Hank, do you want to give the icebreaker, Hank? I talk a lot and you're the co-host, or do you want to leave it to me this time?
Yeah, I can. Well, I don't have it pulled up. Sorry.
The worst advice about manhood you've ever heard, or you can go with the funniest, you decide. So I can go first. I have mine written down to buy you guys some time if you guys want.
So, won't say no to that. That sounds good. It's a good icebreaker,
okay,
by
cool.
the way. Curious what you have to say.
All right. So the first thing that came to mind is this happy wife, happy life. It sounds like wisdom, right? To me, it sounds like cowardice. So I'll tell you why.
Nice.
It seems like your job is to give people around you what they want rather than challenging them to grow. And I think as men who follow the Bible and see the biblical guidance would seem less consistent with, oh, you're there to take on all the crap and then do what everybody else says. And it seems a lot more like, hey, you're the one who knows right from wrong. Like your job is to know right from wrong. And then your job is to create order in the home and a safe place for people to grow, right? It doesn't mean you're a dictator or any of that stuff, but it does mean that you're the one who is responsible to lead your family. And so my wife may be unhappy sometimes, but as long as I'm honoring God and seeking to grow her and grow my family so that they flourish, then I'm doing the right thing. So happy wife, happy life just seems to me like you're just trying to be a hypocrite politician in your home. And that's not leadership.
Yeah. I like the way you said that, Chris, where some people see it as wisdom. I see it as cowardice. That's your tagline.
That's right.
And it's true. So there's truth in that. Yeah.
So I'm trying to entertain a 4-year-old at the same time.
Yeah.
Multitasking.
She's right. I never really got like the same, tagline or something like that. But as far as like manhood, like in a professional setting, it was like, I think mine's a little bit different. Was like the more unique and the more like, just stubborn and bullheaded you were, then the more right you were going to become, and just irrationality aside. So I like, that was my experience coming into the military, and I had a very different approach. I had a very different interests, having a Christian background and interest in apologetics, and I was a little bit more soft-spoken than a lot of the guys. And, it was, and so it was like, well, you're not a man unless you're like kicking stuff over because you're like upset because it didn't go your way, or you're like, you're not criticizing everybody around you for not being perfect. So I saw that as like, that's how they viewed manhood, was like, it was this tough outer exterior, and, but it's not sustainable, and it's certainly not healthy. Right. Because like, now, like as a lot of people like go on, a lot more people are talking about mental health and stuff like that. And they're just like, okay, yeah, that's not a good environment long-term. And then people are finally willing, at the end of 20 years, they're like, well, I dragged that, anger and that kind of mindset into my family. And guess what? It didn't work out real well. My kids, I'm basing this off of like listening to other guys talk, like, well, I have a tough relationship with some of my older kids, because now eventually they kind of rejected me because I had that idea. Which I found that to be really fascinating, is that you can be strong, but you can also be gentle at the same time. And if you're not, and there's no balance, in the long run, it's just not going to work out.
Yeah, it almost seems like, kind of the roid rage, kind of an insecurity, uh,
Mhm.
to that, like guys trying to find themselves and thinking like, well, hey man, if I'm going to be a tough, like pipe hitter or whatever, then I have to act this way because this is what the way everybody else acts or whatever.
Right.
And instead of just kind of knowing who you are and just saying, what, I'm going to, you know, having that independent like line straight to God through his word, and just
Mhm.
saying like, all right, well, who does God want me to be? Because he's the creator and he's the one I should be looking to, not other
Sure.
dudes,
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, I love
First,
it. I mean, that's the difference between being a loose cannon and being, I guess the words of Jordan Peterson, a monster,
Yep.
but like restrained in a good way.
mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned like road rage, and I guess this reminds me. I got my CCW, which in California was a lot of work, but
Yeah.
the Californians are we're used to like jumping through hoops. We're good at it. We're kind of like the British. We're good at standing in lines. But I got my CCW, and the guy who taught it also taught like martial arts and a bunch of things. He's a really cool guy, Sacramento, and he threw out a tidbit because he was talking about different situations. One thing he said was like, on the road when you're driving, be a pacifist. Be a pacifist on the road. Someone road rages, someone cuts you off, don't engage. Because that's like dangerous. And I mean, just do the safe thing. And that's totally different from, like being strong and in control of your, and like able to respond to a threat at the right time. Like one's unhinged, but one marshals that power to where it's needed and is ready. And so,
Yeah.
I just agree with you 100%, Hank. I think that's a very thoughtful. That's quite like a distinction to make and to learn and to put into practice.
Sure.
Well, and the way you're talking about it, Curtis, too, is like, how do you think about how you respond to things? Like, how do you be the one to decide? Like, how is this going to further, like, I mean, I just talked about how, like, I think, and this may sound like arrogant, but how men are supposed to be the ones who know right from wrong, supposed to be strategic, supposed to be deciding where things go, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we can't really decide if we don't have a purpose and we don't have guidance from the word of God, the creator. And then if we don't, take that and say, okay, well then how do I apply that in life? Like, where do I get violent and where do I make sure and not get violent? Like, we have to decide all those things and they have to be rational decisions, right? I mean, otherwise we're just kind of like, oh, wherever someone stands up to me, they can't talk to me like that, and then we just replace pride. And we don't know, we can't tell that we're being prideful rather than, actually men, right? We just seem the same. And
great point. It takes a belief system, but I mean, we're talking the right belief system. Christ rose from the dead, the true one, that has to undergird, and kind of inform what you just said, how you respond to things, how you see the world, like what is a threat, what isn't. That's what constrains it. But like how did God's characters in the Bible at times fight and use violence in an appropriate, good way versus like you're saying, Hank, show strength with compassion and with leadership. And like we could talk about David, who did both of those very well and was very violent, but also at times very compassionate to people and knew how and where to do both. And because God was with him, he was informed by his beliefs, his relationship with God. So that has to be anchored in the truth, totally. Otherwise, you're a loose cannon, and you're kind of in the old school warrior culture. Where it's like, oh, someone's on the road, they look at me the wrong way, kill them, or else I'm dishonored. And I mean, it's chaos.
mm-hmm.
So you don't get very far.
Yeah. What is what's your so I think that's a really good point. We have to have our model of manhood in our minds so that we have our kind of our target painted, right? And we see that with David. We see his I like that example too, because we see David as such a great example of, and I know there are a lot of pastors, they're like, you're not David. And I get it, because we can't just look at the Bible and just say, oh, David prayed this, God did this. Therefore, since I think my situation is like David, and God will exactly do that thing for me, and I think that's naive. But to look at David as an example and just say, like warrior, poet, I mean, what a great example.
Wrote all the Psalms, and it's naive to think there's never a time to be like David.
Correct.
Like never. It's all just listen, be compassionate, and and your icebreaker. What's the worst advice? I have like a silly example in mind, but I think something I've heard over time. You want to hear my silly example?
Yeah.
Okay. So I thought of your icebreaker, and I thought, like, I was a teenager and I was like sitting in church one day, and I was next to like an older teenager, someone in the youth group, and like he was sitting like guys normally sit. He had his legs like one leg up and the other leg on it like that, kind of making an L.
Yeah.
And he was wearing like nice pants and like boots, and I was sitting with my legs kind of like that, just kind of casually, not like tight like a woman does it, but just kind of. And he was like, straighten your legs out like that. That's how a man sits. I don't know why that always stuck with me. So
were you corrected? And do you now
I was corrected.
the errors of your ways?
Yeah, there was also some prayer and repentance involved for not sitting correctly. Yeah, that was my silly example. Anyway.
Well, so the next question, I kind of think maybe the next question is a little bit like that one, but what's the biggest myth we accept about masculinity in our culture? And Curtis, I'd love for you to lead us off in that if you feel good about that.
Yeah, glad to do that. And and that's also good. It connects to kind of why I wrote about Watership Down as well. What was going in my mind, but yeah, I think some of the myths, I think to just boil it down, I think the biggest myth, and also the one that just kind of has become the cultural drumbeat, if you will, was, well, if you're a guy, you're toxic for one thing, but also all you can do with your strength is listen and like shut up and listen and love and don't provoke and don't be a jerk.
Yes.
Like there's never a time to basically show some assertiveness and show some backbone and call something out or challenge gracefully and with clarity. But no, it's just that stops at like listening and loving, because the assumption beneath that is like, kind of like guys are just aggressive. Guys just run all over and just beat each other up, and don't ever do that, which, that's a struggle as well. But the other side of the coin is like, it doesn't go beyond just listening and we kind of heard that in the whole, a lot of things happened in 2020, but I mean, the tragic George Floyd, death, and then the riots afterwards where, I don't know if this happened at the churches you guys too, but at my church and other churches I've heard of, like someone came and said, like black person said, hey, we have a lot of work to do here. This has shown there's like a lot of work to do in our church. Like, what work? Well, you just have to listen.
Yeah.
Shut up and listen, which also means turn your brain off. So
Yep.
I'm getting into, but I boiled down that's my thought. And that was, that really irked me. And that really, when I read this book, Watership Down, that got me thinking, okay, there's a time to do that. And there's times to do that. And I mean, you always want to be listening, but you're also responding.
Yep.
And you're also seeing things clearly and with judgment and with discernment, especially when there's threats, especially when there's danger.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what Watership Down is about. So.
Yeah. So, I love that, I think this is at the center of our cultural, it's part of our cultural drift away from clarity,
Yeah.
I know that John MacArthur, and I know that this is a little controversial to some people, even to some people who might listen to this podcast, but he says when women are leading, society is basically ripe to be being conquered, right? I think that there's a lot of truth to that, and I don't know exactly how that all breaks down. I don't want to be arrogant, but at the same time, because God calls men to lead, I think that there's probably something to that. But if we're nullified, and if it's like, okay, well, you are just supposed to listen, well, then how am I going to influence my family? Because when I was first married, and I heard Wilson, one thing I should add is that Curtis attended New St. Andrews College for his master's degree, right? Right, Curtis?
Yep. And it got me a little fiery.
Yeah. I don't think you can go to Moscow and participate in all that stuff and not come out a little fiery, right?
Yeah, a little salty.
By the way, I think I saw Gemma in a video of the psalm sing of someone getting arrested from the church. Oh, and wow. I think I saw her in the background, like turning around, taking a picture of So anyway, it's kind of funny how that all connects. But anyway, so I think I heard him say that that if your wife is, oh shoot, well, it kind of goes along with the happy wife, happy life. But if I'm not able to fix the problem, if my wife just is allowed to complain, I'm training her to be a complainer.
Right.
I don't let my friends do that. You know, like if I'm hanging around with people who are complaining all the time. I mean, what do you guys think? Is it constructive to allow your children to complain all the time? Is it okay to allow your friends to complain all the time and just be a complainer? Or is it for men to create order and just say, hey, here's a solution? And they're like, no, I just want to be listened to. I mean, my thought is like, well, do you just want to complain? Is that what I'm hearing? Is that what's going on? Like, how do we know the difference, right? If we're not allowed to lead, if we're not allowed to use our skills of making sense of things and solving the problem, right? That's my take on what you just said. And I think of that in home leadership. We're not moving forward until men are saying, hey, let's create a vision, wife, right? Like you're my force multiplier, right? You're the one who's here every day when I'm at work, like how, yeah,
that's a great question. And I think my response was more, I don't know. I tend to think very broad, very fast and get abstract. So I feel free to pull what I'm saying and try to apply it down anytime to like home leadership. And I mean, the practical thing, because I'll be off in the clouds, but yeah,
these are principles. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And I guess where I saw the principle in terms of, just cultural conversation about guys and about the role of society, and families to listen to any victim and just shut up and listen.
Right.
I see how you can carry that to, okay, does that mean someone in the home, like a kid or my wife, can just complain? And my role is just to listen and not have anything to offer back, not have any kind of guidance within that, or not have any kind of challenge within that. How that goes with kids, I'd have to ask you guys, because I'm not a dad just yet. I'm close.
Yeah. Like within a couple of weeks, you're close.
Like within a couple of days, maybe. We're having our son pretty soon. But I don't know. And I mean, just being married, been married 5 years, I listen a lot, and I want to listen well. I think listening is part of what has helped kind of just win my wife over and just show her I trust her. I mean, to some extent, like women want to be heard. People want to be listened to and affirmed. That's a piece of what you're doing already and what you'll do a lot of. And so I think I don't agree with the culture where it says like men don't listen, where it assumes that like, well, people are bad at listening. Like, I don't think that's the case. If you're leading your family well, you're going to be listening already. You should be.
Yeah.
But yeah, like you were saying, Chris, that's the piece where it's like, no, guys should be doing that, but also entering into that. Like, am I just listening to complaining? Am I listening to something valid? Do you need to be heard right now? Or is it something we have to work on in this? I mean, listening, but with that leadership piece and with that taking charge piece and taking charge, even if it hurts, I mean, that's the difference. And that's kind of what I think, I don't know. I guess thinking from society to home leadership, like, the kind of the drumbeat right now is guys shouldn't do that. They should just shut up and not do the leading portion. They should listen, but not do the leading portion.
Yeah. Hank, your thoughts on what he just said, or maybe you have a different answer to that question, the biggest myth we accept about masculinity in our culture?
I love what Curtis said, man. Like, how can you act, or how can you even make a wise decision without listening first?
Yeah.
And I think the assumption that men don't listen is absurd.
Yeah.
It's just absurd. Of course they do, and they always have. I think it's just like that grasping at straws as a way to complain, in a way to cut others down and to, again, like anytime you do that, like what's the reason behind that? And I heard lots of unfair criticisms, like growing up in the teams, and what I always noticed that it was so that they could put themselves just a little bit higher than the other person they were criticizing. I remember seeing that from one of my friends, and like we're still friends to this day. But I remember when I was new, and I was like, why is he's criticizing, for what? And it was that pride thing. Like, it was just so he could just get right above that. So that, yeah, I completely see what you're saying, Chris. And yeah, dudes do listen. And I don't think that's an issue. I think it's just a way to like kind of bump themselves up just right above that person, as a way to make themselves feel superior. And it's not good. It's not healthy for anybody. It's not healthy for the person who's criticizing. It's certainly not healthy for them, because now what does it do? It makes them dismissive of you as a person. Like, oh, they don't listen, so now I can dismiss everything that they have to say right from the get-go because they don't listen, and that they've used that as the qualifier. Yeah.
Well, and we see that in the church, right? I mean, happy wife, happy life. Like that comes from the church, man. That comes from like guys who are older than me. And I remember one time I was talking to a group of guys, and I was like, some guy raised his hand and he was like, do the dishes. Like he was like an older guy, and I think he was trying to like mic drop kind of thing. And so he like raised his hand. He was like, do the dishes. And then everybody's like, oh, he's like, do the dishes for your wife. Just do the dishes, And I'm like,
and all will be well.
I'm like, you know what? Don't do the dishes. Because if that's your trick to try to like make everything right because you're not leading,
right,
that's going to be a problem, right? Like if you're too much of a pussy, it's like to like lead your family, and then get that leadership in line so that your wife trusts you, and your answer is like, well, do something nice to please her. It just kind of seems like a misplaced priority. It seems like the opposite of what we need in our society. How do you get your society to believe postmodernism, to believe that, like to be confused about gender and turn everything vague? How do you do that without like hamstringing men in the home? How do you do that? How do you do that without basically telling men you're arrogant, you're privileged, you're not allowed to talk, right? Like how do you have to muzzle men, and you have to get men to believe it, and to feel stupid for their leadership and for their clarity, and to not solve the problem because you're supposed to listen, right? How do you do that?
And while you're muzzling them, but here's your one trick: just do the dishes. Just do your one thing. And I mean, and it's great. I do dishes for my wife. I guess I feel like I've tried that trick.
I did the dishes like literally the night after I said that, but it was not. I wasn't trying to be a politician and try to like get her to see me or get a reward that night. That's not why I was doing it.
Yeah, I mean, there's what complex job, or what kind of leadership job can be done well by a gimmick. I mean, I was a teacher for 8 years. There's all kinds of little teacher tricks and hacks things to do, but to like actually be a teacher, just like to be a husband or to be a boss or creative director or to rise in the military, any complex thing is hard and takes a lot of things and has like back and forth and trials. And so that one little mic drop isn't a mic drop.
Do the dishes.
There's no shortcut to doing things well,
Yeah.
So
there's one. So I wanted to ask a question about understanding story. So I'm new to this idea that story can actually contribute to your ability to lead, right? And so you say, okay, there's a quote from your article, which will be in the description of this post or this video. So most guys don't read fiction. This is the quote from your article. Most guys don't read fiction or read much at all. In this day and age, and with the biblical case for being as shrewd as serpents and wise with words and thoughts, they can't afford not to. Guys don't need to be literary nerds. That's my role. That's you speaking. Right. But an appreciation for story, narrative, and Bible story helps you read the story that you're in right now. And I thought that was really interesting how you ended that. And so how does story help us be more like men and less like mice or, scared rabbits?
Right.
Shouldn't men focus on, go ahead. Yeah.
That's a great question. And I threw that out. And I don't want to just like, well, guys don't listen. I don't want to assume guys don't read. I mean, there's guys that love reading, there's guys that are just busy. But as a general rule, men read less fiction, go to less plays, which is probably why those are dominated by, the non-Christian. Like, if you want to find a feminist book or feminist bookstore or feminist play, just throw a rock in Portland or throw a rock in LA, you'll hit one. There's so much, but yeah, and I think, yeah, to your question, Chris, how can story help guys lead and do that? And this is a big Douglas Wilson point. This is a big thing they talked about at my MFA program. You have to read and know the story that you're in, which is part of being educated, which is part of just knowing history and knowing what types of characters there are, and what kind of stuff a hero does, what kind of obstacles a hero faces to win, to come through it, and to guide his family and his community and himself, and what kind of obstacles help a hero see his own stuff that needs working on, to see like, well, in this case, I'm the cause of the plague on thieves. I mean, to like see your sin, I guess. So
is it like being able to look at a story? So I read a version of the Knights of the Round Table to my son, and and then I just got the Discarded Image, and I'm going to read that by Lewis. And I think that's a lot about the medieval. And so, you have these warriors, these knights, like, are they an example of what you're talking about? Like being able to look at, Lewis talks about, if it's possible that, I can't remember the quote, if it's possible that our kids are going to experience bullies or tyranny or whatever, then they should at least have heard of brave knights and heroic courage.
Yeah.
Right. Like they should hear these stories. Now, is that the simple boiled down version of what you're talking about? And then we're trying to, is that related to what you're talking about, or is it different?
I think so. Yeah. I think C.S. Lewis boils things down better than I ever will. I mean, he's the gold standard, but yeah, I mean, in a world where, raising a son or raising a daughter, what people are going to meet, bullies and villains and obstacles, or they're going to fling open a cupboard and being a whole new world. I mean, if that's going to college or living in another country, I mean, they're going to have to have read stories where people do those things.
Right.
They're going to have to read stories where the people doing those things are people they can relate to, and they can enter their world and imagine them, and just, you viscerally live that experience.
So identifying.
And so there's a tactical, strategic kind of workout of the imagination that also works out the stuff in your heart, the stuff that your heart and your mind, the stuff you kind of put your chest behind.
Yeah.
I think C.S. Lewis says that. I mean,
yes.
Yeah. And kind of before I read more Lewis, I would tell this to my students, my English students. This is before I went to New St. Andrews, but yeah, people who read a lot of books over time, it builds their empathy. It builds their listening. Like, you're able to really think and imagine, what is it like to be in someone else's shoes, which is great, which is helpful and strategic. I mean, if you're in business or whatever, I mean, being able to just like tactical empathy is a thing where I see what this person is, I see what they're looking for, what they're probably feeling, I can picture it. I'm not stuck in my own frame of reference.
So
that's helpful.
Yeah. So I want to throw this to Hank for a second too, because I know that one of the things that I can tell from kind of being a man, and I've been bullied before, right? And a lot of us have been bullied. I think Jocko Willink talked about being bullied. So if he can be bullied, then I guess I'm okay admitting it, right? But there's a big difference between, like, when we look at international things, or when it's like just a basic principle that some people understand and some people don't. Like, I think there are a lot of people who are like, well, we should appease people, they're just misunderstood. And then it's like, well, no, but when you've dealt with a bully before, you kind of know, oh, this is a bully situation, and I need to punch him straight in the face. Like, I need to just knock him out, right?
Right.
Oh, this is a misunderstanding situation. There, to a lot of us, it's obvious. Like, I can sometimes tell when there's a bully around, and I act differently because I want to create the feeling that, don't bully me, right? I want to create the feeling that you will not be successful. And I think, guys, I think we understand that, but there are a lot. And so when I read it in story, you can always tell in the story, you can always tell when you look at international, relations, oh, this guy needs to get like some bombs dropped down his throat, right? That we need to get down on the ground with these bullies, these Taliban or whatever, right? Because they're bullies. Not because they're misunderstood. I think we get that from literature, from life, from story. And then being able to see that in literature helps us to see it in our life and helps us to develop a more sophisticated view of that. Is that the kind of thing you're talking about? And then Hank, I'm going to ask you what you've seen on the teams in a second. But Curtis, is that kind of an application of what you're talking about? Taking story, life, understanding where you're at.
I think so. And I think it can go all the way to engaging in international conflict where, I mean, if you're engaging with a Hitler, the last thing you want to do is appease him. The last thing, he will see that as weakness. He will walk all over you and then brag about it openly to his population, which he did. Like, you know, he walked away from meeting Neville Chamberlain and was like, I don't respect these people. They're worms. I want to walk all over him. Like he said that. And again, that's read the story of history, but kind of getting back to like fiction, to story, to imaginary stories. I think, yes, it trains you for that. I think it also trains you to read the story you're in, and C.S. Lewis does this very well. It's kind of tactical, thoughtful training in what you should be loyal to and what you should be fighting for. Like if you read this, you know, the Narnia books, the Narnia Chronicles, the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, the first one, just how he describes Edmund, Lucy, Peter, and Susan entering the world and like feeling the snow on their face, feeling like the evergreen lamp just brush over them when they thought they were in a closet. Like you're all in, you're there, and you're excited. Like that wintry feeling is beautiful. And later on, they're hanging out with Mr. and Mrs. Beaver, who are good people, and they talk about Aslan, and they can sense like just the conversation lifts up like Aslan's on the move. What is that? And I don't know. I'm butchering it. Lewis's description of like, you know, Mr. Beaver, Mrs. Beaver cooked the fish, and the fish had butter melting on it, and they ate it. It was the most scrumptious thing. And Mr. Beaver drank his beer.
Yeah.
So just that kind of gathering on the
there.
hearth, being together, like being loyal to the good things that are worth fighting for. I mean, yeah, I think it's what Lewis was doing while also training you for the fight. And so, yeah, I mean, we're story consuming people. People need stories, like men need stories, women need stories. It trains your loyalties, but also shows you the world around you.
Yeah.
All through imagination. So,
dude, what do you think, Hank?
I think that's fantastic. I love it. I remember hearing Ravi Zacharias talk about that, you know, from him gleaning from other people of like talking about how it's stories, it's the arts, like you were saying, Curtis, like that shapes people's perceptions of reality. Like, because people that are never exposed to like a story or something of how, you know, people in India live or people, they deal with something, or people don't understand, like, well, I don't understand why you guys don't just sit down with like the Taliban and you know, AQI, like, you know, Al Qaeda in Iraq, you know, like, I don't understand why you guys don't just sit down and like have a conversation. It's like, because everybody's different. And if I give you a story, or if I give you like an illustration, it paints a picture that now you can understand. I think it's a super powerful tool to be able to tell stories. And, you know, journalists are supposed to be able to tell stories in a certain capacity and without any slant, but that impacts how people see the world and how they understand it. And I think it just permeates society. It's pretty awesome. I love like the Chronicles of Narnia. I think it's childhood favorite, you know, but going back to what you asked about me experiencing that in the teams, you know, it's like there's different views, and like I got trained based off of stories. Everything I heard, I had no real world application, right? It was just like dudes that were coming back and now they were instructors, and they're like, hey, this is what I did, this is how I reacted. And so now you have a picture of be like, okay, so there's violence when it's necessary, and then there's other times where it's not. And I'll never forget, I was in dive phase, and one of the guys came back from Iraq.
You were in what?
I was in dive phase, so in second phase of going through buds.
Okay.
And we had like a guest, you know, team guy that came over, and he just gotten back, and you know, he talked about the highs, you know, and I don't remember if it was him directly or like they were just in the house and they just like violently burst in, got into like a full-on fist fight. The guy didn't deserve to get shot, but he deserved to get roughed up a little bit and subdued. And then the next thing you know, he's having to like huddle kids, you know, and like within seconds, you know, you have to move from one high where you're just so like as violent as necessary to then like right back into that gentleness of being like, okay, like I got to switch this back over because this person deserves to be calmed, you know, in a scary situation. And that it stuck with me. It was really, really powerful for me. So, and it was like, and it came from stories. It came from experience. It came from like, now my imagination is running wild of like, okay, wow. So that's now going to shape how I need to act in the world based off of what this dude came back and told me.
Dude, that makes two things come to mind. One of them is kind of like I didn't think of that, kind of like preparing you for the parts of fighting that are not like, you're not just shooting, bad guys in the face,
Yeah.
And then also it reminds me of C.S. Lewis when he talked about Lancelot, how he had gotten this massive honor, right? He's lopping guys' heads off, right? He's just a warrior. But then later he receives as honor, like, I don't know, Knight of the Year, like Employee of the Year for King Arthur's The Round Table, something like that. I can't remember what it was, but anyway, and he was crying, right? Because he had both that warrior and that the necessary well-developed, and I would say well-developed emotions, even though I haven't proven that yet in this conversation, but kind of a well-developed understanding of proper emotion toward honor. And then you could extend that and say toward love, toward the people around you, toward your enemies. The Bible gives us all kinds of good guidance into how to develop proper love that doesn't conflict with that truth, that the Bible also gives us, and that ability to act. So, but I love that. I love that example, beating up bad guys, cuddling kids.
Yeah. What a story, Hank. Wow. I almost feel like, who was that guy? Man, I want to hear. I mean, I'm sure he has more stories like that.
There's lots of them. And like, it's a sad thing that the American culture, and not just us, like everybody around the world, like gets this idea that like most people that go into, wartime situations are just evil, savages, like just, I listened to a 5-hour podcast that explained what happened to the Blackwater to rear Square massacre, which wasn't a massacre at all, and it was completely shifted and lied, and they ended up locking these guys up. They eventually got presidential pardon.
Give us the story real quick, because
okay. So 2007 was like the most violent year in Iraq, right? They had to do a troop surge. I think it was like 30,000 troops, something like massive. That's the year I went my first year. So extremely violent, out of control. And
so you had trial by fire, huh? They didn't ease you into it. They just
right. Yeah. So that's my 4-year-old. And so I'm gonna have to do it. 1 second.
No problem. Do it. Yeah, I think it's one of my favorite things about having Hank on the podcast, because he has some of those wartime stories, and he has all kinds of stories in his bank he hears from other people, and then all kinds that he has on his own, but that decisiveness, and how do you apply that to to real to poetry? How do you apply that to being like a man with a heart of flesh,
Yep. And there's a lot back into like, his instructor shared where, you're fighting 1 second, you're fighting to win, to kill, the utmost violence, and then with the utmost compassion, you've got to comfort someone. And what a picture of what guys should be aiming for, and what Christ aimed for. I mean, to talk about the violence he suffered, and also the ferocity with which he flipped over tables, but also, hey, children, come to me,
And the fact that a sword's going to come out of his mouth, and he's going to
right.
It's like this warrior, at 100%. Yeah. It's at the heart of what warrior poet journal would mean, or warrior poet would mean,
That's true. Yeah. The great comforter, the great warrior who spits swords and also comforts the orphans and widows. I mean, that's both. And for sure. And that's a great question, Chris. I mean, I think to make the case for reading stories, because we all hear stories. I mean, even the short, version for like an instructor in the military, or someone else in business, or someone you respect. I mean, just imagining how they navigate that situation they were in, that's helpful. We do that. And I think it's a prolonged exercise to then enter a fictional world and spend the time to read it. I mean, I could be reading, 10 ways to get rich or do this, like a lot of books that will help me do things, but it's definitely investment in your imagination. And then, I mean, also your vocabulary, also like a lot of things that I could go English teachery on. But
hey, I have one I have one idea that might also. So I'm reading Trump's book, The Art of the Deal, and it makes me
Oh,
less
nice.
afraid to call people. It's like, okay, I'm reading it and I'm like, it makes me less afraid to make deals because I'm like, oh, he's just doing like he has his style, and I would have a
Mhm.
very different style, but it's kind of the same. It's kind of like the other thing is going to grad school. I thought, oh, grad school, that would be lame. I don't even know what I do. I don't even know what they do there. And then I worked around a bunch of grad students. And I'm like, oh, I know exactly what's going on. And then I went to grad school because it was easy because I saw the story played out. Right. Like
Right.
I could then understand how I would fit into it. Now, is that part of what you're talking about as well?
I think so. Yeah. I think you just copied The Art of the Deal. That's one I want to read. I've heard that's fascinating, and I've heard I'm now getting into Victor Davis Hanson, who's a big, he's a classicist. He's on Fox News, and he wrote the book The Case for Trump, and he cites, well, if you want to, if you wanted to see why Trump was doing some things that look erratic, there is a method to them. Read The Art of the Deal. That's
Yeah.
Even with handling dictators like a Kim Jong, or something like, and not to butcher Art of the Deal, but like part of that's like the bizarre behavior of like you call someone, you're bold, and they make an offer and you're like, oh, I'm insulted. And you kind of like holler and you kind of like put on the show and you kind of throw them off, and then you kind of settle. And then they're your best friend. He's
Yeah.
like, well, I mean, look at Trump's foreign policy. It's crazy, but it works. Like, I hope our enemies don't read that. That's what he's doing. And so that was just a funny comment, Victor Davis Hanson. Like Trump actually, that stuff he actually does. And works in its own style.
It is interesting when you read that, and it was written years ago, probably in the 80s or something, or the 90s. And if you read this book and then you compare like CNN with Fox News, how they treat Trump,
Mhm.
he's kind of like the Fox News version, clearly. It's like he's the pro-Trump version of, anyway, it's just kind of my impression when I read it. I was like, oh yeah, this is just, he's like a guy with, anyway, enough about Trump.
Right.
Hank, so we're killing time. Tell us your story.
Yeah.
2007, big surge. You went in your first tour.
Yep. So a little bit before, so what was the end goal of that? Sorry.
Yeah. So he was, so you were dealing discipline and cuddling.
Yeah. Right. So a lot of like the perception of most people was just, and this came from painting a picture, right, of stories of journalists being like, oh, like these mercenaries for hire are just like killers, and like the whole point is that they're just pure violence and they're over there. And
Right.
And so there was a backstory that people didn't realize until later. Hillary Clinton's emails were leaked, and some other cables coming out of Baghdad were leaked of the true nature of what was going on. And so basically what was happening was politically is they were looking for a way to paint Americans, and specifically contractors were supposed to be the scapegoat to help al-Maliki get reelected, because the Iraqi people just didn't like him, didn't think he was strong, felt like he was too weak for the Americans, wasn't standing up strong. And so they needed a scapegoat, but nobody knew this, right? This was all going on political back channels and through the agency and so forth out of Baghdad. And so what happened was they were looking for just something, right? They're like, hey, as soon as something happens that we can spin, that's going to be our thing. And so there was extreme violence in Baghdad, and there was Blackwater. Everyone loved to hate Blackwater, and a lot of it came down to they didn't like the owner of Blackwater, right? So rich white guy that was Catholic, so pretty conservative. So he went against a lot of the State Department's positions, and for whatever reason, right, like just some natural division. So Blackwater,
Well, his contract was probably with the Secretary of State, right?
yeah, so they started getting contracts,
contracts.
and it actually kind of ended up being their downfall, right? Because they didn't see eye to eye on a lot of stuff, like politically and ideologically, and so Blackwater like had a target on them, even though they were working for them directly,
right.
Directly supporting tons of their stuff. And in fact, there would have been little to no success without them. Contractors outnumbered U.S. service members like 3-1 or something like that.
Well, and they had different rules, right? Too.
Yeah, and so that was like some stuff that was tricky. But I mean, you still can't murder, right? It's just
right.
Murder illegal, but that's what they were trying to make it painted as. And so what happened was they were responding. It's a group that was specifically to respond to help other people out who were in gunfights, right? So Tahrir Square is this massive place. They just had set off like some car bombs and stuff like that. And so some insurgents were dressed up as police officers. It's this big square. You come in, do kind of like almost like a European roundabout, and they used some buses and stuff like that to block off exit routes and so forth, right? So it was a big setup. It was an ambush. They think it didn't go out the way it went, and that's because this team showed up to help out, right? Specifically, all they are is just like shooters on the ground to go in, help rescue. Like a week or two before, they just went in and helped rescue some guys that got shot down in a helicopter. Right. So
they're like a quick response type.
Yeah. And so when they showed up, they thought the reason why the ambush didn't happen, they think it was like premature because like they showed up and it was like, oh, we didn't account for these guys. Let's just kick it off. Right. And so they started getting ambushed from different positions. And they said they rolled in noticing, and this goes back to everybody, is like, you just understand your surroundings. They're like,
so at this point, sorry, I just want to make sure I'm clear. So the Al-Qaeda, who was it?
Yeah. Al-Qaeda.
Set up this ambush. They had people dressed up as cops. They had buses set up to block certain areas. And so they could control the flow of everything. Yeah. And then they knew what side the U.S. Troops were coming into, and they were setting up that as an ambush. And what you're talking about now is, okay, now that ambush is triggered. Now we have the QRF coming in, these Blackwater contractors. Okay, gotcha.
Which they think they didn't expect. And it actually wasn't U.S. troops. U.S. troops were actually in a contact like a mile or so down the road. There was actually 3 gunfights all within like a 5-mile square, I think maybe or less, but that was like roughly what they said.
But it was like coalition guys who had come in.
Yeah, so actually they think that it was a kidnap attempt because everything they did was to get like high value Iraqi like parliamentary like members or local governance to and from meetings, right? That was a really big position of what they were doing.
Oh, so just a convoy bringing
so
like
they
a
think that it was they were going to either try and kill or kidnap this guy. And then the QRF came in and they were like, okay, now it's a little bit more to deal with because they didn't expect them. And so they think it was a little bit different. But what happened was immediately they noticed, because over there it's hot, guys that are getting paid to be cops, they went through like whatever, kind of just a joke of a system, and they're just like kick back. It's super hot, 130 degrees, 120 degrees over there. So, but these guys weren't trying to relax in the shade. These guys weren't trying to just like get some relief. They were attentive. They were like carrying their guns a little bit too aggressively, a little bit more like, okay, these guys look like they have a purpose. And so as soon as they rolled in, they're like, this is different. This is something. So
they recognize these cops aren't your normal, like just cops.
Yeah.
They're not real cops.
Yeah. And which they found out because as soon as they rolled in, they started engaging them.
That's a little bit of situational awareness right there.
Yeah, which is key, which they preach constantly, right? Like, you need to see the atmospherics around you. That will let you know. Is there no animals around? Are people not wandering down that street? It's probably dangerous, right? It's probably because they know that a bomb got planted or something like that. So it's a lot of stuff like that. However, in just gun battles, these guys don't care. They came in. They'll get into a gunfight anywhere, and if civilians are killed, like, it's all the better for them, because then they just spin it in a PR, right? Again, going back to the stories, it's all about storytelling. And so they get into an engagement. It wasn't anything above crazy that they had ever experienced, and then they got back and just started fixing up their stuff just like normal. However, then it was like, like the investigation started immediately, and like, this is abnormal. Like, there was nothing different about it. Guys got ambushed. We rolled up, like, thankfully really quickly and got into a quick gunfight and got out of there. And then it was like, it ended up being that they lied, right? Like, So 2 innocent people did get killed. Iraqis were there. They were like, yep, is a white Kia, be on the lookout, which we had these things. Always, it was like, there's a white Kia that is a car bomb. Be on the lookout for it, right? So a white Kia, 2 people in it, came at them directly. We have like the escalation of force. They kept coming, so they end up shooting them. It ended up being 2 innocent people that were probably like panicking and confused. It happens, and so unfortunately, but it was a good shoot. And so tragic, but you can't let somebody get near you, especially in a white Kia that was like literally a memo came out like, hey, there's a Kia car bomb coming out. Yeah. And so you can't let them come drive directly at you. There's escalations of force as they're shooting warning shots at them. They didn't stop, and so they end up shooting them. Well, it turned from that into 17 dead bodies. Like, they just rolled in, and they said this is literally how they kind of try to picture it. Like, it's not Iraq, like Baghdad, where there's 108 Iraqi insurgent engagements every single day on average. It was like driving into town square and just start shooting everybody and then roll home. And so that was like how like they pictured it. So no other bodies were ever recovered or found, and like they hid all this stuff. And so the idea was these guys just wanted to come in and murder people, and they end up convicting him and they end up getting pardoned. But a lot of work went into to try and uncover the truth of it. They said like there was no shooters, there was, nobody engaged them. They just rolled into this like beautiful, peaceful square where people were just trying to enjoy their peaceful lives because it's just Baghdad in 07 and nothing out of the ordinary, and they start shooting people. And that was like the story that they portrayed.
Wow.
As like, and they hinted it was like, no, these guys are just bloodthirsty. They want to come in there, as if these people didn't have families, they didn't like love anybody, and like, and they didn't have backstories of tons of experience of time where they didn't shoot, and they did show restraint, and they had this level of professionalism, like I said, like of going into a house and being able to escalate and then de-escalate back into really quickly. And said they painted this picture of like, these guys just wanted to go in and just murder a bunch of people. So really tragic story, but they ended up getting pardoned by Trump. And then a lot of other evidence and some other people were able to come to their defense and show that like pictures of AK shells and all this stuff was on the ground that disappeared for years. They'll be like, oh, nobody else shot. And then bullet holes like that were made by AKs and not, 223, like from their M4, a lot of stuff like that they went in and hid. They actually had video footage of the entire thing, and they deleted the middle part, the entire action part. So they had the beginning where it started, because it started off with a VBID, vehicle borne IED, and then they had the end of them rolling back, and the whole middle was deleted. And they're like, oh yeah, that's normal. Why would it? So somebody literally went in and edited the drone footage that would have shown the entire gunfight.
Wow. So that's on the
American story, right? To tell a story that, hey, these guys are bloodthirsty, these guys are this and that, and then you later on learn after emails were leaked, like, oh no, there was a whole different thing going on and these guys were just the fall guys. And they all made public speeches about it, constantly naming people by name and doing all that stuff. And it ended up being the end of the company, and ended up, taking those guys a horrible ride. But
they had to change their name.
Yeah, I mean, they ended up going to jail. So that their initial trial got dismissed, and then
Blackwater.
So they sold completely. No, all of them, like, done. Everybody who was associated with him and was owner, and Eric Prince was like the sole owner pretty much. Yeah, he sold out and they're done. And they changed to XEZ. But yeah, completely new, revamped. Like, nobody associated with the old company was allowed after that.
Gotcha.
So, and then Hillary Clinton emailed her second in command, as she was head of the State Department, 2 days after 1 to 2 days after they tried to take it before a judge, and the judge was like, you guys did so much wrong here, no way. And they didn't do anything wrong, and then 2 days later they get re-indicted, and they just built a case against him for 4 years to make sure.
Hillary Clinton wouldn't do that. What are you
They're
talking about,
political.
dude?
Yeah.
She would never do something like that to our soldiers.
Political
You
clout,
know?
yeah.
Yeah,
But
she
it,
would never use
it's just
that.
that storytelling narrative, and it all ended up being so that some ExxonMobil stuff, like, because they were like, well, we're not gonna, renew some contracts. We won't sign the. There was this agreement of troop withdrawals into. It was either debated for 2009, 2011. It ended up being 2011 into 12. I can't remember the name of the agreement, but all that stuff was hinging on like, hey, you need to make a big example, and we need to make a stand for the Iraqis. And so they painted this complete farcical picture of these contractors being murderous people without a soul, like, and it worked for a while.
Yeah. So one of my takeaways from that is that there are probably fewer just animal brutal guys than maybe we think, and maybe that's the poster child of toxic masculinity, is this caricature of soldiers, special operators who have to go in and do decisive things, and then but the reality is that there's humanity, and so I want to go on to the next so that the expectation of comfort and safety. So Curtis, you said in the article, again, posted in the description, if anybody wants to follow the link, there's no free lunch, no guarantee of ultimate safety, no freedom from all predators, no rest from vigilance, nothing. And you were commenting on the book, you're pointing this out. This is a realization from the book. And so my question is, what do faithful men do when there's no safety on this earth? What do faithful men do in your mind when there's no safety on this earth? How do we deal with that reality? And then Hank, I don't think you know anything about this one, so I'll let you.
Well,
I'll be asking you in a second.
Yeah, no, that's a great question, sharpening down to kind of like, what do we do? I like that. I think going from that fascinating and like crazy story you shared, Hank, about the fabrication, how someone made all the pieces look a certain way, and I guess that got me thinking about a little scene in Watership Down, and not that totally relates, but I mean, just being in a world where appearances can be so deceptive and can be doctored and can mask the real danger and can mask the realities. That's definitely a theme in this book, and how to navigate that, like as Christian guy. I mean, that's hard, that's tough. It's tough. I think the answer from the book, and I think also life, is that it takes constant vigilance, and it takes that it means there's no retreat to the idea of like, oh, well, there's a free lunch. Oh, well, this narrative that makes so much sense that, like, that the contractors were the evil guys doing this, and that's, of course, it's who they are. I mean, you have to see the story for what it is, and you have to see human nature for what it is, and sin for what it is, and the fact that those things make the world a complex, messy place. And there's probably, I know that there is no rest for that, until the new heavens and the new earth, obviously. Like, there's not going to be rest from that. I mean, there'll be no letting our guard down, and no resting from vigilance, which is a big theme of the book. I mean, just in a nutshell, the Watership Down, it stuck out to me so well, and so well for 2021, is that, it follows a pack of rabbits. I mean, the main characters are rabbits in England. They're small, they eat lettuce, they burrow, and it totally gets into their furry skins. It's like a masterful creation, but they also live military style. They're also Spartan, because kind of like navigating just life or a mission in Baghdad, where there's 108 firefights a day. I mean, there's 1,000 predators possibly lurking one hill over, another hill over. It starts with a group of rabbits that leave their warren, that leave their home, and every step is assessing danger. And is the coast clear? And I smell. What's this smell? Is it a dog? Is it a weasel? Is it like a hawk? Oh, there's this thing that's like a road. There's asphalt. It smells weird. Oh, there's this thing that zooms by that the humans made. And because it's from the rabbit's perspective, they don't know what it is. Like, they have their own language, but they know it's this thing that zooms by that can kill you. And they know, oh, that smells different. Like, you don't cross that road unless it's very safe. I mean, it's constant awareness that everything wants to kill you unless you outsmart it. I mean, that's the rabbit's daily bread. And they have their own, like each rabbit warren, each kind of like burrow has its own leadership, a chief rabbit, and it has something called the Oslaw, which is an odd word, like OWSLA, like the Oslaw. It's part of this whole rabbit language. That's basically the rabbit special forces. That's the chief rabbit's special forces that are trained in knowing and categorizing all the threats and what to do if you sense this threat or that threat. And, you know, if you're on a hill at a certain time and you sense this threat, what you can do. And like, someone's always on guard. So like the female rabbits and the young and the, you know, those that are sick can like feed and graze and then go back in safety and not be killed. I mean, because so many rabbits are killed. I'm getting really into it, but it follows this pack of rabbits that leave and go into the unknown with danger all around them, which in a way is like, you know, liberating a country or rolling back the Nazis or the Taliban and like facing insurgents. And so
they're entering new areas and they need to, so to relate this to the story that Hank told, we have to pierce through the narrative and see the reality and ask the questions and really understand what's going on. Because I remember in your article, you also had a part where they ran into a warren where this it was just, man, everything was great. There was this carefree rabbit they met from that warren, that initial contact with the new warren, and that rabbit was just like carefree and but it ended up being this cult, right?
Yeah.
With its own myth, with its, sorry, not its own myth, we shouldn't use that word that way, but with its own kind of backstory that they told the rabbits and that they all believed, right? And that was something. So in the story from your article, I imagine there are a few things they had to really try to understand beneath what was initially shown them, right? When they show up, they have to be able to see the danger or the real situation underneath the narrative.
Yeah, absolutely right. And I have the article up. Could I read you just a little bit of the book that kind of shows that kind of meeting that unknown thing?
Yep.
Yeah. So the pack of rabbits leave their warren, and by the way, they later find out the whole warren's gassed. So their home they left. They got out kind of before the bomb dropped. Like
before the farmer, and that's how the farmers would. And so because that's one way to deal with. I think you talked about one way to deal with rabbits in your, you know, that are eating your crops is to gas them and just get rid of them. Another way is to like breed them or whatever. But anyway,
right. Yeah. So they leave and they're facing the unknown, and they come across this other rabbit out in the open, and they're hunched. They're kind of like, where's the threat? Where's the danger? Every move, you know, is a tactical evaluation. And here's what Richard Adams writes. Hazel felt puzzled. Hazel is the main rabbit, the leader. And they're seeing this other rabbit just walking in the open. Hazel felt puzzled. How big was his warren? Where was it? How many rabbits were concealed in the copse and watching them now? Were they likely to be attacked? The stranger's manner told nothing. He seemed attached, almost bored, but perfectly friendly. His lassitude, his great size, and beautiful, well-groomed appearance, his unhurried air of having all that he wanted and of being unaffected by the newcomers one way or another, all these presented a problem. And it's like you said, Chris, you know, encountering the unknown, they meet this rabbit who's eating well, who's, you know, comfortable and relaxed and chill. And they're just scrappy. They're starving. They're kind of like out in the unknown. They're like, you know, on a mission. And that's the rabbit that belongs to the cult. Do you mind if I talk about the whole cult thing and just like kind of do a spoiler and do a takeaway? Is that all right?
Do it.
Okay. So anyone reading, it's well worth reading, but I'm just going to give you the spoiler. I'm going to summarize. And this is, again, probably why I wrote this essay on the book, like in 2020 and 2021, where the drumbeat was, you know, just shut up and listen. Don't challenge. Be safe. Literally stay in your home. Out here in California, like your governor telling people like, don't go out with, there's more than 3 or 5 of you. And I have friends that were like, oh, you want to get a beer? Oh, I can't. There's more than 4 or 5 of us. So that was the idea. Just, you know, obey authority to a fault and you're safe, right? That was the reigning thing everybody did.
Right.
And so in this book, they meet this rabbit that is obviously
nothing like a cult, right? Nothing like a cult.
Nothing like a cult at all.
No.
Yeah, and again, this book does such a good job going inch by inch and not giving the whole thing away and staying in their frame of mind. And so they see this rabbit that's well fed and just out in the open, not worried. They're like, oh my gosh, like what's, and they go to his warren and they meet more rabbits. And what these rabbits do is there's all these veggies growing outside, and like vegetables are a coveted thing. Like if you're eating a carrot from their world, like you stole it from a farmer and you've risked your life. Like you might have been like skinned alive if you mess up. And they're just bringing all these vegetables like back. They're like, oh, what we do is we gather it and we bring it back inside so everybody can feast. And they're like, okay, so they do that. And this warren is full of rabbits. It's stuffed. It's very overpopulated. It's just crammed full. It's growing. And there's one group in this rabbits called Fiver, who's kind of the runt. He's kind of the outcast. And he gets these visions, these premonitions. And over the book, they turn out to be right.
And he's part of the good guys, though. He's not one of the cult. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Sorry. He's one of the good guys.
Protagonist. Yep.
Yeah. He's part of this band of rabbits. He's not the biggest or the strongest. And actually, the biggest and the strongest find him annoying and don't like him because he's this runt and he has these visions. And they're like, what is he talking about? Yeah. But over time, he turns out to be right. And so it's very poignant when like he wins their respect for having that insight. So go to this warren, and this little pipsqueak, like doesn't like it. He's like, this is weird. I don't like it. This place smells like death. I'm like, what are you talking about? Everybody's healthy. There's all this free food. How can it smell like death? And they meet these new rabbits, and the visiting rabbits. There's this whole mythos in the book where they tell stories of like the rabbit lord. It's like El Irira, and he's part of this creation myth where he was the first rabbit and he was quick and agile, and he kind of pissed off the god. The god is called Lord Frith, and the god gave all the other animals the ability to kill and hunt the first rabbit because the rabbit pissed him off for some reason. The rabbit kind of boasted, but he made the rabbit quick to balance things out. He's like, you're always going to be hunted and your people will always be hunted, but you got to be quick and trick them. And that's kind of their mythos, like their Bible story, right?
Yep.
So these new rabbits, they're the guests, right? And they're like, well, what do the guests do? The guests tell a story. We'll tell these new mysterious rabbits our story about how you trick and how you win and how you survive. And they tell a story. And the other rabbits are like, nah, that's interesting. Like, it doesn't resonate. And they're like, wait, this doesn't resonate. This is like the rabbit lord, L.I. Rabbit. You don't tell stories. They're like, yeah, we know them, but they're kind of like outdated. We don't tell them anymore. And then the newcomers tell their story, and they get this young pipsqueak, and the first rabbits, like the young never tell stories because they don't know anything. They're young. But these new people have this young pipsqueak, kind of like a mascot, who tells this hippy-dippy rabbit story about how the rabbits belong to the wind and the rabbits belong to the sun. And the rabbits, it's like this hippy-dippy weirdness. And they're like, huh, that's strange. And that little pipsqueak rabbit who like calls things out is like, we got to get out of here. This is bad. This is really, really bad. And they're like, what's your problem? And he wants to go. I don't know. And I guess I felt like that pipsqueak when 2020 first hit, where it's like everybody was staying at home and the state was going to take care of us. I was like, this is bad. And everyone was like, no, it's good. It's compassion. If even one person dies, 2 weeks is still the spread. And I was like, are you serious? Like, how many businesses are going to die? That resonated with me. Where it's like, does anyone else see this? That this is destructive and like we're walking off a cliff here? Yeah. Am I the only one in the room? So that resonated with me. And to wrap up the tidbit, that the whole world turns out to be a cult because the very next day, when they're out gathering more food, these are the good rabbits. One of the good rabbits gets caught in a snare.
Yep.
Like a metal trap. The snare is literally right outside the warren. And once they're caught, like you're probably going to die. Like if you try to get out, it's going to choke you more. You're going to bleed out. The farmer's going to get you. And this pipsqueak Fiver has a monologue where he explains the whole thing. Like he explains the whole thing. And I even quote it in my article. He tells them, don't you guys get it? Here's what happened. There was a farmer who had a bunch of rabbits and he realized I could gas them. I could kill them. But you know what I could do? You know what would be easier? Why don't I breed them? Why don't I feed them? I'm going to put out tons of food and let them grow and multiply. And every once in a while, I'm going to pick one off, that way I'm going to have like a healthy, like full bred rabbit. And I can pick off as many as I want because the rest are doing fine. And so that's the reality.
Yeah.
And this is a group of rabbits that know it because they're not stupid. They know once in a while, someone's going to die. Someone's going to be picked off. Like they probably, oh, we're being fed. There's a farmer who's doing it. Like we have a master, even though he's not there all the time. And so in the meantime, we're going to be peaceful and loving and hippy-dippy, tell hippy-dippy stories, but we're not going to be brave or trick people. We're not going to have that military mindset. We're just going to accept it. And so
we're going to get soft and we're just going to live the easy life and we're not
Yeah.
going to ask any questions.
Yep. Yeah. We're going to accept the gift of the free food and also accept that one of us is going to die, and we're going to shrug it off and not help that dying rabbit and say, well, we're going to pay that price. And so there's a brilliant scene where the one rabbit's caught in a snare. Fiver is telling him, you morons, don't you see what's going on? And like all the rabbits know this, and that's why they went soft and tell hippy dippy stories. And when they go back to the warren for help, that first rabbit they met that was like good looking and stuff,
The
that
hippie,
rabbit is like, what are you talking about? Someone's in a snare? Shut your mouth. Shut your mouth. And like fights them and like scares them off. So they learn, not only have the rabbits like been living large and ignoring this, when someone is caught, as a rule, they don't question it. They let them die. It's anathema and immoral to go and help someone that could threaten the whole thing because the rest of them have a good thing going. Like that's what cults do.
But Curtis, what does this have to do with manhood and our jobs? You know, I just can't see the connection quite. I don't know.
Only you read more fiction.
If only I could understand how this connects to biblical masculinity. But let's connect that. Let's build that in. Let's talk about what do we do every day? Like, how do we need to be then to be able to deal with things like this? It's not just like, you know, go out and fight everyone, right? Like we talked about that. That's obviously not what, you know, manhood means. It doesn't mean like we tell everybody, you know, whatever the simplest solution is that comes to our minds, we just, you know, go with that, because they would have then believed in the cult because, oh, hey, we see the evidence of joy and, you know, the surfer, you know, hippie pot smoker rabbit or whatever, you know, telling us to lighten up, you know, like, why shouldn't we just lighten up?
Yeah.
Why don't we just put on the mask and just do whatever they tell us to do? Is that okay?
Yeah, well, that's the question. And the book, I mean, I've read so many books I've taught Animal Farm. I haven't found a book that poses, you know, the two alternatives so well. I mean, like one is serfdom, one is slavery. Have your master, pay the master's price, you know, turn a blind eye when somebody gets killed right outside, and don't ever go help them because you're eating your food and like you know, your rice bowl is full. So be a slave versus have freedom, have true independence that will make you the best you can be, that will make you empathetic towards others. Because the five rabbits, like after they get through that and at the end of the book, they're like brothers because they've been through it together, right? And like they would die for each other. So it's be freedom and the cost of that, like face that cost. That cost is you got to fight out death and you have to enter into death and be really courageous versus give that up and be a serf, but you won't grow any virtues. I mean, it presents those two choices.
Wow.
So clearly. And of course, there's a broader application to society. I mean, like the Warren cult of socialism. I mean, the Warren cult is like, if someone's going to give you a free lunch, they got an angle.
Yep.
Right. I mean,
it's the free lunch, free carrots, man.
Yeah, like stay at home, be safe. Like we'll handle the virus. We're going to get rich doing it. You know, not to get into. I mean, but like,
right.
Or an Animal Farm, the ones that say, "Oh, we'll take care of things. We're smarter. We're going to give you everything you need." Well, they rise to the top. They have the good life. I mean, like that's happened throughout history. And so, yeah, in cults, I mean, you know, or like the cult of communism and stuff. Like, you can't mess with the leader. You can't mess with the things. You can't point out with the sacrifice because those in charge will make sure you don't. I mean, you have to bind to all the rules. Yeah, the price of being free, you know, and living virtuously and having independence is vigilance. And I think that's the biggest takeaway there, whether that's if you're talking like your family, like what school do I put my kids in? You know, do I bow down to this diversity training at the job? Not that it's so simple. I mean, there's all kind of complex ways, but what price are you paying today that maybe may seem good and beneficial, but down the line, where does it go? And what's the bigger picture of what's happening? And I think over 2020, I left my teaching job. My wife and I had to leave a church, unfortunately. I just think we entered into a time where seeing the bigger picture and where things are going versus not seeing it matters quite a bit. And will matter for where a family goes, where a school goes. I mean, there's a big shift. There's been a big reshuffling because a lot of people don't want to live like serfs. They don't want to live like slaves in a cult where you're well fed, but your neighbor's business died. His kid committed suicide because he was stuck indoors for a stupid policy with no science. Oh, well, that's the price.
That's the
not just
price.
happiness.
And we're not gonna question that, and we're not gonna report it in the news, and we're not gonna make a big deal about it, because that's the sacrifice that's necessary. We don't rescue that person. We don't, there's no outcry. This is the policy. We're buying into this. So now I can see two reasons why we would not want that. One of them is a very secular reason. It's the slavery we were talking about. Once you build this, you build on a foundation of lies and this, just like the contractors, the Blackwater guys we just talked about. We build policy, we build our ideas on the back of lies. At some point, those lies, well, what if we start finding out stuff? That's the real danger, because then we start finding out the truth, but now we're bought in, and our structure is built on these lies. We've gotten the job with Google, and that we can't leave, golden handcuffs, whatever. And now we have to make some serious moral decisions about how we conduct ourselves at work, how we address people, and we start being willing to tell lies. And so, and I don't know if that's so different from my second challenge to that, which is men, I believe, because of the biblical worldview, that men, we need to be able to see things as they really are. We need to be able to see, and so that we can strategically say, okay, I'm going to build my house on a rock. I'm not going to build my house on government promises of men, or any kind of cult, right? A cult would be building a foundation that for an honest man would crumble really quickly, and he's just wasted all that time. And now he has to go start. For me, I'm not about wasting time. I'm not about moving my family from cult to cult.
Yeah. I'm not about giving up my children, because cults also sacrifice children. They do horrible things. Every cult has a bloody secret.
Yeah.
I mean, we could get into it, but they are bad news bears. And I think, again, this book, every single cult, every single system that promises, your safety, you get whatever you want, but you do nothing. You just don't question. There's a price. There's a terrible price to that, even if you're not seeing it. And so, and if you go back to like Bible times, like back in the Old Testament, I mean, I've no doubt. I mean, it's hard to go back there, but like the cults that probably sacrifice kids to Moloch and stuff, like, you're probably pretty well fed if you were there and you were rank and file and you didn't question and you were belonging. That was a way to survive. Like, you got some survival. Like, there's a lot in that, but look at the cost and look at where it goes. Those tribes aren't around anymore. The God of Israel wiped them out, punished them. And so, it becomes life and death pretty quickly, I think, as well.
Well, there's one other piece to this. And as we're kind of wrapping up, I want to bring your experience back into this too a little bit. So I had a recent situation where the school board of our small town, they want to make a policy on transgender, right? So basically tell their teachers how they have to deal with transgender kids. And so there were a bunch of people who prepared statements and stood up and, my challenge was a little different, because I thought, there are going to be a bunch of people who talk about the, biblical standards, that there are no, the science shows us that men and women are clearly different, and then gender is made up and things like that. What I did was I kind of brought in a military example, because that's kind of like, I didn't serve, but I'm an Army brat and I loved it. Right. It was fun. Right. When I was raised on Fort Benning around a bunch of war fighters and, badass dudes, and great influence. What I said was, I said that there's a reason that second lieutenants or ensigns in the Navy, basically O1s, right out of OCS or ROTC or whatever, and they just got their commission. They're in charge of guys, NCOs, who have more experience, are better fighters, better leaders, better managers, and better in many cases than they are, because they have more life experience, right? Like some 35-year-old I don't know who's in a platoon, Hank. I mean, how many guys are, say, let's say your average ensign is 25, 26 years old. How many NCOs are older than that within the platoon?
About 90%.
Really? So, all
Easily,
right.
because most people that go into the special forces are not, you know, like straight out of like high school or college. It's a fairly low percentage. Um,
And
I
what's the
think.
lowest ranking O that is in charge of like what do you say, like a platoon would
So
be?
what they do is they bring in an officer that we went through and graduated from, and typically they are directly out of either the academy or they came from some university program. There's a few that come over later that are transfers, like lateral transfers from Big Navy. Those are really hard to get billets. That's significantly less. It's just they just don't see the value. You know, like they need guys where they need them.
It is like an O3, like who's typically a lieutenant.
Yeah, that's really rare. They might get like one a year.
Mhm.
I remember seeing one, and he was in the class in between my two classes, and he ended up getting dropped from training. And
So
he ended up,
In the Navy, is it like about 40 guys? Is that a platoon in the Navy as well? Because I know in the Army it's about 35, 40 guys.
no, so our platoons are 16.
Okay.
That's a standard number, and then it can be divided into half by 8, and then down into fire teams of 4, and then shooter pairs of 2. Right,
So
so
who's
that's
a
the idea.
platoon commander, platoon leader? What
Yeah,
rank would
is
that
a
be?
03 probably around like 26 ish,
Gotcha.
give or
Okay,
take.
so like an Army captain would be about
Yeah,
that range.
100. Yeah,
Okay.
it's the equivalent. Yeah.
So a bunch of the guys. So my case I made was like, there's a reason why this officer is in charge of people who actually have better military training than they do at that to that point. And it's because that officer was supposed to, so got a liberal arts education, which was supposed to mean they knew right from wrong, because you need someone who will disobey an unlawful or an immoral order at the platoon level, right? Because you need that person there. And my case was that, okay, school board, you have an opportunity right now at the local level, elected officials, people who understand right from wrong, to stand for from wrong right now. This is not about you getting the school board out of legal trouble. This isn't about practical matters. First, you have to do what's right. And you have an opportunity to do that right now. And then I turned to the parents and I said, oh, and parents, if they don't, then we have to find other alternatives, you know. But that was the challenge. And I feel like that's kind of an example of the story I told, right? Like that was, I was trying to get them to see like there's right from wrong, and we have to know that. And if we don't know that down at the local level, uh, we compromise our families. We fail to do what these rabbits did when they left, and then their colony got gassed, and now they're looking for. We failed that vigilance test, right? That Curtis is talking about. Um, have you seen? And I know that liberal arts education has changed today, and there's probably not a lot of people coming out of liberal arts institutions who know right from wrong. New St. Andrews, of course, accepted. There's some good schools still out there, but have you like tell me, is that accurate, or at least is it supposed to be accurate? The story I just told.
For military purposes.
Yeah, like what's your experience with officers and being able? Are there good ones who actually
Yeah,
do that?
so I mean, good ones will take into account to that, right, and make a wise final decision, and then
Mhm.
the ones who have chips on their shoulders, the ones who are not wise, try and act like they know more than they do because they're told either by like maybe a bad mentor or somebody or ego, man. Like ego gets a lot of people, you know. You're just like, hey, I'm in charge, and me making this like final decision and being stubborn and being like, no, I don't care what your experience tells you, this is what we're going to do. That, you know, that's just the differentiating factor.
So I
You
read
know,
this.
ego
So I read this story. 10th Mountain Division. This lieutenant, I think, platoon leader, Army. He was in Afghanistan near Pakistan, and I can't remember what it was called. The book, But there was one point in the story where they had just been brutalized, like just caught just crossfire after crossfire, having to fight uphill all the time. I mean, it was just the story of this book. There was one point where this Taliban, they had this guy and he had killed like 2 or 3 of their guys. They knew it, right? And one of his guys, one of his NCOs, just wanted to cap this dude, right there, and everybody was in favor of it, and he forbade them. He was like, "No, you can't do this." That and they didn't, and he was like, and he explained it in the book, and he said the reason for that was because basically, they're going to suffer. There's going to be mental problems. There's going to be PTSD. There's more chance of mental issues, for these guys. I can't let them do this, right? Mm-hmm. Because I understand the effects, right? So this officer was like, these NCOs, they're great war fighters, but we have to think about like what's going to be most constructive, what's going to be the right thing to do. And I'm going to forbid them from executing this guy right now, not just because it was unlawful, but because it was immoral, and he knew that it would affect them. Yeah. What's the cost of not having men who are able to make those decisions and call those things out in a leadership role? What's the effect? And I'll leave that open to both of you guys before we wrap up here.
Wow.
And maybe it's just a matter of explaining better what I just tried to explain.
No, you sharpened that to a really good question, Chris. I have some stuff from the book coming to mind, but Hank, if you want to go first, what would be from your experience? I'm curious what you would say too.
Yeah. I mean, that goes down to, I see it as a good character trait. One, if you're left alone to isolate and just go off of your own emotions and your own experience, you're going to be left really exposed to things like that, right? Because those guys were obviously emotionally compromised, which rightfully so, right? Yep. Like that's a normal human reaction. It's life and death, and dude, this guy just knowingly like was probably the guy that just killed their friends, their brothers. And so the emotional response is all right, vengeance, right? One for one, let's do it, eye for eye. And they're not able to remove themselves from that immediate situation and think, okay, well, what about long term? Is this wise? Am I going to feel this same way once the emotion dies down? Am I going to be able to sleep good a year from now? So it's always good to have a good group, kind of like those rabbits. There's a group, right? And everybody has their own dynamic, and mm-hmm. people that maybe weren't directly affected in the same capacity can come in with a different mindset and be like, hey, look, that's not a good idea, right? Like, yeah, you're not the strongest rabbit, you're not the weakest, or whatever, you're considered the weakest, but there's a mind intelligence that you're bringing to the group, and you smell death, right? This isn't good. Whereas everyone else is like, how can this not be good, right? And so that's a really good thing about having group dynamic and picking your friends and picking those who people you're willing to listen to in those situations. Like I was looking out for them. So yeah, I think it's a great,
even when they're that's interesting, because you're calling out basically, it's good to have that perspective, but we can't always have that perspective. I think that's what you're noticing, having been in war yourself, mm-hmm. That maybe it's not as easy for me to pick out, is that, yeah, this person is emotionally compromised. Mm-hmm. The importance of having a brotherhood and a team to be able to have like, I'm emotionally tied into this, but my brother is telling me, hey, don't do this, right? Think about like divorce. Think about, just all the effects of divorce, or think about the, making a business decision that's stupid, or things like that. And then it's one thing for us to be able to kind of elevate ourselves and constantly be becoming those poets who understand right from wrong. And then having that group dynamic where there are other people, there's that support too. You're going to be so much more powerful if you can be, when you're emotionally compromised, you can still benefit from another mind who you can call, who you can connect with, and just, talk about things or be in the battle with, right? Mm-hmm. Which is way different from that independence and that isolation that so many men, want to pursue in order to try to achieve that result.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love what you said, Hank. It's amazing. I see that in the book as well. Like that's going to go right into the book. Watership Down has that group dynamic, but it's amazing that also plays out that you need that. That in a country that, a war situation or liberation or just a peacekeeping, just, scan the horizon, you need different people and their strengths. And you need a system that kind of, adjudicates who follows who and what the deal is, but everybody's giving input. Everybody's all in. Everyone's looking out for each other with all their strengths, and together the group prevails. And to your point, Chris, yeah, guys definitely need that. Chris, one of your earlier videos, it might have been just a short video with you talking and not the podcast, but you talk about Gladiator, and you have like a great illustration at that point. I mean, there's a scene in Gladiator where Maximus, who's a general, who's been, character assassinated, taken down, thrown in as a slave, even though he's a masterful general, he's put in the Colosseum where he's like going to be killed for entertainment. He's there with a bunch of guys and they're facing off with chariots. There's like chariots going around them. And he says to the guys, like, how many of you were a soldier? And a few of them, he's like, all right, band together, do what I tell you, and we're going to survive. Like they band together and the chariots surround them and they trip up the chariots and they, put their spear in the spokes and one flips over, and the guys off on the road that are scared and fighting are picked off. But together they prevail.
Yeah.
And it's the same.
Do you remember
thing.
that scene, Chris or Hank? Do you remember that scene from Gladiator where they surprise him, like all the gladiators come in, and then whatever his name, who's the bad guy?
Maximus. The bad guy.
Yeah. Anyway, so he comes in. He brings in a bunch of like trained military unit, right, to just slaughter, and the gladiators were just going to get slaughtered because they just scatter. And then Maximus is just like, all right, guys, all right, here's what we're dealing with. And then he aligns them.
Yeah.
Toward
They prevail.
And they win.
And the last thing, maybe the last little point I'll make about the book, Watership Down, like the whole book shows kind of the triumph of that group dynamic. As an application to survival, to expedition, also to warfare. I mean, there's a later chapter where the rabbits face off against a different group of rabbits it's kind of what you were describing, Chris, maybe not really, but there's a bunch of them that can't make any decisions, that are just kind of caught in the system. And there's one leader, there's a dictator. His name is General Woundwort, which is like a great name for dictator. Like I think of like a warty rabbit, but like he's the dictator and he rules by terror. He tortures rabbits that disagree. He kills them. They do what he says. He makes all the decisions. Like he's the Stalin, and Hitler making these micro decisions for these guys out, and all the guys are being killed in these waves, and nothing's organized at all. He's like the one guy controlling all these pawns.
Right.
And that system can function, but it's cumbersome. It's bulky, and the individuals are like robots, are like pawns, and they square off against this smaller, outnumbered group of rabbits who, as you're describing, Chris, and also Hank, like they know each other, they have a clear leader, they've been through it, they respect each other. If one's emotionally compromised, the other ones can step in and help. They can think through situations. They each have different input. They'll trust each other if one has the solution. Each of their strengths are utilized and maximized, and it shows that they can prevail against a big, massive behemoth with just one brain in charge, a tyrannical brain.
Yeah.
Which is like the Western. I mean, that's the 300 Spartans as well. That's the Western way of using strategy and everyone's strengths and probing your enemy versus just rolling in with force. And you have one godlike tyrant who's going to rule by terror. That doesn't work. So the book's full of those things. But and how does it get down to like guys and families? I'm not sure, but like you said, Chris, maybe it's just like being part of that, like knowing the guys you can trust, you want to be in fellowship with. And I hate to say it, but that can't be a guy who was like, 2 weeks is still the spread. Like you locked down, right? You didn't. You did what the governor said, right? That's the Christian thing to do. That's like sacrificing in love. That's listening. I'm like, no, you're part of the cult. I mean, you're not the guy who can compliment me and who I want to be sharpened by. I want to be in a group of people who have that sharpening and that clear leadership and that direction. And that direction is the Bible and what Jesus did and what God does. And guys who see that, know that, and like at the right time, we'll fight for that. Not always, but strategically sharpening each other. Groups like that are forces to be reckoned with, I think, and I'm trying to find people.
Oh, dude, I love that. We talk about, and I've talked with you, Hank, I don't think I've told you about this, but The Warrior Poet Journal is actually we're going to start in August. We're going to start the teams. So, and the teams are small groups of guys who are meant to do just that. It's just like, and so one of the questions I think we're going to deal with in teams is how do you recognize other men who are able to, be a part of that are worthy to be kind of a part of that core group that you start at your local level, your local church, your local town or whatever. Part of the question is how do you recognize those guys and how do you get them excited about, how do you recognize the guys who aren't going to be a part of the cult, right? At your local church? How do you recognize the guys who are going to push back against that and who can see through that? And so I couldn't have a better, I don't think you could have teed me up better than that for the closing here. But before I do that, do you guys have any last words, any last thoughts on the conversation?
Nope.
Guys, what a great podcast. I feel like we got it.
Yeah, read good books and enjoy the Warrior Poet Journal and the teams and, find guys and do it together. So,
dude, I feel like we got through about half the questions I wanted to get through, and there's still some really good ones in the discussion guide that I think we have. If anybody wants to comment, comment below, comment in the video. If you guys have questions, just want to talk about any of this stuff. But Curtis, thanks so much. People can find CM Miller, right? CM Miller is the name they're looking for. Thanks for chatting with us today. Oh, Shelf of Crocodiles.
Yeah, look for that logo. Go on Substack, look up Shelf of Crocodiles. I write about this book. I nerd out on other things. I do Shakespeare sometimes, but I mean, the application's interesting, both individually and also broadly as what Christians should be doing and just reading the story around you. I mean, to me, that stuff lights up when I read books. And so if I can put wind in someone's sails, I'm glad to. And yeah, and I love how you're doing that, Chris, you and Hank, with just on the family, on just the what do you do level. I think a lot of guys are looking for that, a lot of Christian guys as well, just kind of scratching their heads and be like, okay, don't be a jerk, just listen. But wait, but I mean, I think you guys can really speak to a way forward. So
yeah, that political manipulation is just shallowness. You need to understand the word. And I will say that you can't. So I think that we've talked today about understanding story and how you put yourself in that. I think that Shelf of Crocodiles, your blog, has the ability to expose that for us and help us understand that. You do that in every one of your blogs by connecting the story to, I don't know if you go down to the steps like, all right, therefore do this. I think that's what we do here at the Warrior Poet Journal. Yeah. But you definitely make that connection. And so you won't, if you go and read that blog, you won't lack that perspective. I will plug the teams. So we're starting teams in August. We're taking signups right now. Teams. So basically we believe each man is meant to lead at the Warrior Poet Journal. Teams bring together men who want to grow in their leadership, and we challenge each other to grow in skill. The goal is to help you build skills and confidence to lead at your local level. You can find out more at warriorpoetjournal.com, and the leadership teams link is at the top. That's where you can find out more and sign up. Guys, so this is it for the most recent episode of Man Talk, the podcast of the Warrior Poet Journal, where we glorify God through encouraging men to leadership and toughness, allowing God to be the trainer, knowing that He's the one who owns the battle space. Thanks, guys. Appreciate you.
Thank you, Chris.